Hello, horror stories. My name is Alberto, and I have been working as a bus driver for many years in the night shift. I could say that half of my life I have dedicated to this profession. I decided to share this very scary story after listening to some colleagues on this channel. The truth is that my job is pretty quiet. At that time of night and on my assigned route, there are not many people. I like to drive at night because there is no traffic, although driving in the middle of such desolate roads has led me to experience some strange things. However, nothing compares to what I witnessed that night that changed my life. This happened in 1998, when I started in this profession. I remember my first day on the job because I was full of nervousness and excitement. The buses were big and very old, with that characteristic noise that echoed in the cobblestone streets. Days before, during training, my superstitious colleagues began to tell me stories about the last stretch of a route I had been assigned. They told me of passengers disappearing without a trace in a matter of seconds, from one small town to another late at night. Of walkers on the side of the road vanishing into the bush in the blink of an eye, and of very strange and peculiar passengers being carried on the bus. At first I took it a bit as a joke, believing that they wanted to give me a memorable welcome, with such unreal and spooky stories to scare me. At the time I was an inexperienced youngster. I played along, joking and laughing along with them. But I remember that first night as if it were yesterday. As I drove along the assigned route, already almost memorized, the last stretch of road was dirt. Gradually it began to cloud over, and rain began to fall, and on the last stretch, the storm intensified even more, making visibility difficult. Thunder rumbled and lightning lit up the dark sky. I was a little nervous, although the few passengers I was carrying remained silent, calm, watching the rain. Puddles on the road made the vehicle sway, forcing me to maneuver carefully to avoid getting stuck in the mud. As we drove on, the storm became more and more intense, with large drops hitting the windshield, further reducing my visibility. Suddenly, on a curve, something very strange happened. The darkness of the night meant that I could only see the road for brief moments. Suddenly we found ourselves on a very narrow, cobblestone road with no lighting. At first I thought I'd taken a wrong turn. I didn't recognize that route from my escorting practice. My colleague, who was chaperoning that night because I was new to the route, was puzzled. He approached me and asked me what was going on. The rain was so heavy that he suggested that I stop the bus, as it was not safe to continue like this. In those years, the buses had a clock on the dashboard that I usually consulted, but when I looked to see the time, the hands had stopped moving. I asked my colleague to tell me the time, but his watch had also stopped working. The dense vegetation surrounding us and amidst the fog, we decided to get off the bus to investigate where we were. Despite the experience of my colleague, who was older than me and knew the route perfectly well, I could not identify which road we had taken or how we'd gotten there. The branches were hitting the windows of the bus hard, as if we were in the middle of a tornado. My colleague suggested turning around to get back on the road, but the accumulated mud and poor visibility made it a risky and almost impossible maneuver. One of the passengers got up from his seat and asked us, where we were and how far to the next station. He was a regular passenger, so he knew the route well, but he was also as puzzled as we were. His watch had stopped working, and we were in a quandary as to what was going on. We waited a few minutes inside the bus, waiting for the rain to subside enough for us to get out. We reassured the passengers, asking for patience and assuring them that we would soon be moving on. Some were visibly upset, watching with trepidation as I tried to maintain control of the bus on slippery terrain. The tension in the vehicle was palpable. Finally, the rain began to let up, and I proceeded to back up until I reached a cobblestone road where an intersection was located. The lights of the bus barely managed to penetrate the dense fog rising from the asphalt, mixed with the accumulated mud, creating an even more unsettling atmosphere. In the distance, we spotted a light on the side of the road, about 50 meters away, going into the bushes. I decided to stop the bus and walk towards it with my colleague. As we got closer, we discovered that it was a small, dimly lit wooden house, the only structure for miles around. As we moved forward, I felt an unusual chill penetrate my bones. As we approached, we spotted an elderly man sitting on the porch, with a pipe in his mouth and wearing very peculiar clothes. He wore a long beard and held a cane in his hands. He was quietly watching us from his rocking chair as we approached him. We looked at him with some caution as we approached. The man seemed surprised by our presence, but he greeted us with an unusual calmness given the situation. When we were close enough, he took his pipe out of his mouth and greeted us with a slight nod. "Good evening, sir," I replied, trying to maintain my composure despite the strangeness of the encounter. My colleague remained silent, watching the man with scrutinizing eyes. "What brings you here in such a stormy night, Assassinum?" "Stamin?" asked the man with a look that seemed to penetrate our souls. "We have strayed off the path, sir. We got lost and saw your light from the road. Do you know where the nearest road is?" I answered, trying to explain our situation as concisely as possible. The man looked up and, in his husky, slow voice, asked us where we had come from. I replied that we had come from the small town a few kilometers down the road. Upon hearing the name of the town, the man looked at us with an intrigued and somewhat confused expression and asked us what state in the United States that town was in. I looked at him somewhat confused and explained that it was only 20-30 minutes away, being the closest town on that road. However, he insisted that he did not know it, suggesting that we were probably confused since the nearest one was about 70 miles away. We were puzzled. I thought that perhaps due to his advanced age he might have a short memory, or perhaps he was under the influence of alcohol. The man watched us with curiosity and some distrust, and in that silence he broke the silence by asking us about the clothes we were wearing, pointing to our bus company uniforms. Simple black pants and light blue shirts, but he didn't seem to understand. He asked, "What is that?" referring to the buses. By that point I knew he was not going to be able to guide us. "They are passenger transports," I answered. But the man just remained silent. We mentioned to him that we had left the bus parked with passengers looking for help, and that we wanted to get back on the road as soon as possible. The man replied that there was only bush in that area and no roads. We looked at each other with my colleague and knew it was time to leave. We thanked him for his time, although our doubts increased even more. We left him there, in the gloom of his porch, his eyes fixed on us as we walked away along the same path we had come. The cold intensified with each step, and the fog seemed to close in around us, creating a more oppressive atmosphere than usual. We returned to the bus where the passengers, still restless, were waiting for news. We explained what had happened without going into details about the strange encounter with the man in the wooden house. We decided not to delay any longer and tried to get back on the route to the main road. With difficulty, we managed to turn around on the narrow cobblestone road and advance slowly, avoiding the deep puddles and mud that continued to be an obstacle. The rain had abated somewhat, but visibility was still reduced by the persistent fog. We concentrated on guiding the bus carefully, looking for any sign of the road that would take us back to more familiar, well-traveled terrain. The ride back was long, branches still snagged on the bus, tires slippery, but I just concentrated on following the same path back. Finally, we emerged on a marked road. But our journey did not end there. The traffic police stopped us because one of the headlights was covered in mud and the license plate was barely legible. I pulled off to the side of the road and, after warning me about the condition of the vehicle, with branches on the roof and in the windows, he asked me for the bus documents and asked what had happened, that it looked like we had come out of the middle of the bush. I explained that somehow we had gotten off course and ended up lost, a few kilometers north of where we were. His surprised expression worried me. He told me that it couldn't be, as there was only bush and no access for a bus. And the officer asked me exactly where we had been, and I tried to explain the location, remembering seeing a sign indicating kilometer 66, and how I found my way back to the main road. He looked at me in disbelief, then grabbed his flashlight and got on the bus to make sure everyone was okay. He quickly got off, gave me back my papers, and warned me to drive more carefully and pay more attention to where I was going, as it was impossible that we had entered there. According to the traffic officer, many years ago there was a community in that area at KM 66 that disappeared decades ago, and no one had lived there since. I got on the bus quickly, but with a very strange feeling. What the officer had told me echoed in my head as I took the wheel of the bus. My hands were shaking slightly, and every branch on the roof of the vehicle seemed to whisper a mystery that I could not comprehend. I drove with extreme caution, trying not to lose my concentration, but my mind kept wandering between the officer's words and the strange wooden house in the middle of nowhere, and that mysterious man. The passengers, still nervous from the previous experience, remained silent. The rain had subsided, but the atmosphere was still charged with tension as we moved along the road. That night was restless, for I could not sleep, tormented by the idea that something in that place had stopped in time. I could not understand how we had interacted with the soul of someone who no longer belonged to this era. The most disturbing thing is to know that the man did not know it. The feeling of uneasiness persists today in my mind on every walk I take at night. If you have enjoyed this story, we invite you to subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any others. Until next time.